We're going to finish off Mishnah 11. Just going to put it back on the board for everyone, and we'll read it one more time. At least the main part of Abtalion said, Chachomim, sages. Doesn't have to be a sage. It could be anyone who's really a teacher, which could be all of us, really. Be careful with your words. You'll be exiled and placed to bad waters. We talked about that yesterday, the metaphorical. And the students will drink from your waters, which would make basically they're going to make a mistake. And Yamuta, they'll die as a result, either literal or not literal, but ultimately they will come to be making mistakes based on the things that you said, and it'll come out that the God's name will be desecrated. So just a couple of other angles on this, and that is that something actually Rabbi Lau mentions and others, that there are a couple of areas when it comes to, especially in Hebrew, where, and I guess you have it in other languages too, where you can have a word that when you hear the word, it could have more than one meaning. So if I say something to you, it could be interpreted multiple ways. So the Gemara, for example, gives a classic example of the Gemara in Pesachim says that one of the sages taught a law that when you're making matzah for Pesach, so the water should be water that was left overnight. It wasn't like fresh. It was the water was left over overnight, and then you use the water. And the Hebrew for it is mayim shalanu. The word shalanu can mean to stay overnight, but shalanu can also mean that belongs to us, right? Shalanu. So one of the rabbis, Rabbi Masna, he taught that lesson, and he said mayim shalanu, and the students, the people who are listening, said, "Oh, has to be our water." So they all brought their own water. Everyone started bringing pots of water because instead of using the water that was supposed to be used, which was the water that sat overnight. So everyone made a mistake. So you see this idea that if you just say something and you're not paying attention, first of all, to who's listening, they could totally misinterpret what you're saying. Another very famous example is also brought down in the Talmud is the Yoav, who was the general for King David, was given a mission to wipe out Amalek, right? We know we're supposed to wipe out Amalek, and he goes about doing it, and he ended up he killed the males. He did wipe them out, and he comes back and he says, "I did the job." And King David says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, it says Timche as Zachar Amalek to basically destroy the males of Amalek." And he says, "No, that's not how you read it. It's spelled Zayin Chof Resh. It's spelled Zecher, the memory of. It's not referring to only males. It's referring to everyone." Oh, he says, "Well, my teacher taught it to me that way." So he went back to his teacher. He said, "No. How do you read this word?" He said, "Zecher means to remember, the memory of." Oh, so how come you didn't correct me? So it turns out the teacher may have said it, but he wasn't paying attention to what everyone else was doing, and he didn't, and everyone else made a mistake. So it was a big resulting mistake from that. So again, the example you could have in Hebrew, where you have a word which is spelled the same, pronounced differently, and if you teach it wrong, you can come up with a totally different conclusion, right? And this is, these are maybe a bit of extreme example, but it happens in many, many different things. And therefore, the message is that as a teacher, you have to be careful that the words you are using are understood in the way you meant them. It's not just that someone had no idea what you're talking about, but you can use a word that literally has multiple meanings, and someone else is going to take a totally different, and they'll be able to explain it according to that other meaning in a totally different way than was intended, and actually in a totally mistaken way. Rabbi Lau also points out just one other note about it is, if you're teaching, make sure you practice what you preach. We're familiar with that, of course. Rabbi Tursky points out that as again, a Torah scholar has to be careful with everything that he says. And he said the reason there is a person, the more respected a person is, then the more weight their words have. So if some whatever, some person off the street, let's call it, makes a statement about anything, whether it be politics or policy or who knows what, or a law, and someone else hears them and they say, "Yeah, that's a wild statement." Okay, some wild statement. But if someone who's in a position of prominence makes that statement, then other people say, hey, wait a second, that's an important statement. Either they will or they won't listen, but they're going to take it from a much stronger point of view. And if someone says something, if someone who's in a position of authority or of importance says something which is not nice, which is inappropriate, then that's a chilul Hashem. That's a desecration of God's name. And therefore, the more important your position is, the more careful you have to be with every word you say. And if you express some type of opinion or something which is negative and other people hear it, they're going to be taking it much more strongly, and it could be, again, result. And this, obviously, in the rabbi business, when you're giving a talk, when you're giving a class, but and then the later part of the Mishnah, which talks about going into exile. So one of the ideas of going to exile means you're no longer in the place. You're no longer in the place where you taught it. So if you are no longer there in the place where you taught whatever lesson it was, you're not there to answer questions, right? If somebody now says, "Oh, wait a second, he said that," and you're not there to clarify it anymore because you're in quote unquote exile. This, by the way, applies nowadays very importantly because it applies when you put something out there on social media, right? Usually you put something or you on a video of some sort, on television, somebody makes a statement that it's out there and it's out in cyberspace, and there's no way to bring it back. And if it's something that's unclear or something that's negative and something that's inappropriate, then it could have devastating consequences. So ultimately, the message is clear that, first of all, everyone has to be careful in what they say in terms of making sure that what they mean is clear to others and that there's no misunderstanding. And B, that in your position, whatever it might be, it be given that whoever's listening to it is someone who is going to be respecting your opinion, then even more so do you have to be careful with all of the words that you choose. And we will hold it there. Have a great day, everyone, and a happy Hanukkah.